This is a continuation of the opening chapter of Margaret Atwood's Oryx and Crake. So Snowman comes down from the tree and he sort of looks around at his belongings, right? And it says the various things that he has. He's stashed some mangoes, he's got some no-meat cocktail sausages, he's got some scotch and a chocolate-flavored energy bar. Can't bring himself to eat it yet. It might be the last one he'll ever find. He keeps a can opener there too, and for no particular reason, an ice pick. Okay, so Snowman is a scavenger, okay? This is not an advanced, civilized person, okay? So we see that, the setting of the novel is one of want, of need, of scavenging. So we should be starting to understand Snowman's situation at this point. Okay? So he opens up the plastic bag of the mangoes and he says, funny, he remembered more. Okay, so this idea of memory is important because the novel will move back and forth through history. What do we remember in the past? What do we imagine of our future memory of the future? Okay, so do we remember a time of plenty? Okay, whatever that is in our imagination. With climate change and all this kind of environmental degradation and, the problems we anticipate in the future, how will we look back on this time, the 20th century? Imperial notions of empire with Britain and others, okay? How will we remember that? Will we remember more or less, okay? And what is the reality of this memory? And then Snowman says, it is the strict adherence to daily routine that tends toward the maintenance of good morale and the preservation of sanity, he says out loud. He has the feeling he's quoting from a book, some obsolete, ponderous directive written in aid of European colonials running plantations of one kind or another. He can't recall ever having read such a thing, but that means nothing. There are a lot of blank spaces in the stub of a brain where memory used to be. So he's reciting something that was important. Okay, a recitation. It's been drilled into our heads over and over again. And he can just quote it. And he sort of remembers reading it, but he doesn't know where it comes from. He has a memory of it, but can't remember the source. So this is an interesting moment to say, how do we remember? What do we remember? What sticks in our mind? And notice what the content of this thing is. It's the strict adherence to daily routine that tends toward the maintenance of good morale and the preservation of sanity. Okay? So what is this doing? It's telling us to, as the British would say, keep a stiff upper lip, okay? That stick to your routine and you will remain moral and sane. But we get the suspicion that Snowman's not in an environment where this does any good. Okay? So there are a lot of blank spaces in the stub of a brain where memory used to be. So what are we trying to maintain? Okay, so people talk about, contemporary lifestyles and worldviews, the way the world works, the unsustainability of it. And so we again get the suspicion that something has collapsed. This is the dystopian vision of the novel, that we can't sustain that old way of life. Yet, here's Snowman reciting this, that if we just stick to what we do, then everything will be okay. But as he says, some ponderous directive written in aid of European colonials running plantations of one kind or another. That these plantations sort of failed, they morphed into American capitalism or whatever you want to say, okay? But these are the things that we told ourselves historically from the colonial perspective, that this will maintain order in the new world. But we know that that doesn't maintain itself. Rubber plantations, coffee plantations, jute plantations. Hey, I'm drinking coffee right now. But jute plantations? What was jute? Atwood writes. Jute, if you don't know, is a kind of fibrous material they used to make cloth. Kind of like hemp. Do we use that anymore? No. So coffee sticks around, jute doesn't. Coffee plantations were successful. Jute plantations were not successful. They died out, I guess, okay? They would have been told to wear solar topies, dress for dinner, refrain from raping the natives. It wouldn't have said raping. Refrain from fraternizing with the female inhabitants, or put some other way. Now, I want to draw particular attention to this, okay? So, language matters in this chapter, okay? Refrain from raping the natives. It wouldn't have said raping, okay? It would say fraternizing with, okay? So the strength of the language. Snowman knows that you wouldn't say, don't rape the people. Just don't fraternize with them. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means rape, but we can't say rape because that's a terrible, awful, horrible thing to do. We just won't fraternize with them. So notice that these colonial directives, the language of history, the official time, the official language that we use, tones down the violence inherent within the activities that people do. Wouldn't have said raping. It would have said fraternizing. So this is where, our treatment of history needs to be examined. How do we explain the things that happen in history? What language do we use to highlight or downplay the actions that people take? So if this, sounds overblown, it's not. I mean, just look around us now with things like Black Lives Matter and the Idle No More with Indigenous peoples and so forth, okay? That they're drawing attention to the things that are happening in the world, that we were oppressed, we were enslaved, well, that's maybe harsh language. Well, no, actually, what language do we have to address the historical wrongs, okay? Or put some other way, ... as Atwood says. He bets they didn't refrain, though, 9 times out of 10. Yeah, these things happened. Right? We just don't write about them or talk about them. In view of the mitigating, he says, he finds himself standing with his mouth open, trying to remember the rest of the sentence. He sits down on the ground and begins to eat the mango. Okay? So he's trying to tell himself these platitudes to make everything okay. He's relying on the language of the past, the colonial language of conquest, domination, the language of Health-Pfizer and all these people, the corporate entities that will meet in Oryx and Crake. This was the language they used to justify their imperialism and their colonialism and so forth, right? And he's trying to resurrect that, but he finds that it doesn't offer him any kind of solace at all. So the words become meaningless. And as we'll see in the novel, Jimmy is a word person. He's a wordsmith, word surf. He's supposed to use his language to sell products and so forth. But when language is degraded to the point of only selling products, of just being used for instrumental capitalist reasons, it becomes very one-dimensional and it fails to capture the breadth of human experience. And that's something that's obviously very close to the heart of a writer like Atwood, and indeed any writer.